great to be part of this Polyglot Conference Global. Thank you for allowing me to participate. My name is my name is Gabrielle, but you can call me Gabby. I'm originally from Canada, but I now live in Mexico, and I speak French, English, and Spanish, and I'm conversational in German, and I'm currently learning Arabic and Japanese. And I'm also studying applied linguistics here in Mexico. So what I'm going to present to you today is a sneak peek of my master's thesis. So the topic is, here we go, oral corrective feedback. Now, what is that? Well, basically, oral corrective feedback is the oral response to a mistake, usually to correct it. So it's when you're in a language class or in a language exchange and you say something wrong and someone comes out to help you fix that mistake. Now, that can be a teacher, it can be a language partner, it can be another student. Basically, it's any kind of oral correction. Now, what interests me in this topic is that it's always a touchy subject, I feel, in language classes. So I'm a language teacher, and I'm also a language student, as I've mentioned. And when I'm teaching, I never really know when to correct or how to do it, because I want my students to feel comfortable in the class and to speak as much as possible. And we feel like when we're correcting, we might make them feel insecure or stop them and they say, oh no, I can't say it correctly. So that's why I was interested in this topic. Now, my actual project is working with online lessons, but I haven't finished the full results just yet. So I'm just presenting a little bit of the theory I've found so far, and I'm going to make this very practical so that you as language learners and maybe as language teachers can use these tips for when you're learning a language. Okay, so my question for you is, do you prefer to get corrected when you're in class? So my first question for you today is, when you are learning, do you prefer to get corrected? Do you like it when teachers give you corrective feedback? And when you are helping someone, do you correct them? Do you correct others? So, for example, if your friend comes and says, yesterday I eat an apple, what would be your response to that kind of sentence? Now, there are several responses you could have in that situation. Let's have a look. So here are some possible answers to yesterday I eat an apple. You could say, oh, great, good for you, thank you for the information, and not correct anything. You could also say, yesterday you ate an apple, giving them the correct answer of how to properly make that sentence. Another possibility, you could say, I believe you mean ate, since yesterday is in the past. So making them know why you're correcting them and what is the reasoning behind it. Another option could be, yesterday you, and let them complete the sentence, and hopefully they can say it correctly for the second time. Or you could say, I'm sorry, could you say that again? So once again, you let them repeat their sentence, and hopefully if they're focusing well, they can say it better because they know the correct form. You could also say, you eat an apple? Are you sure? You eat? So maybe repeating the sound can make them say like, oh, it does sound strange, right? And finally, you could say, don't forget to use the past tense of the verb. So giving them a clue of the grammar, the correct grammar, so that they can use it properly. So those are all possible answers. Let's have a look at the first one, which is no correction at all. In which cases would you use no correction at all? Well, it depends on the context, obviously. So first of all, the participants of the conversation. If you're talking to your boss, maybe you don't want to correct his grammar, right? Or his or her grammar, sorry. Or I don't know, if a person is giving a conference like I am, you won't raise your hand to say, sorry, that's not the correct way to say it. That would be kind of inappropriate. Also, the message. So if your boyfriend is breaking up with you, maybe it's not the right time to say, I'm sorry. I want to say that your grammar is not correct in that context. So obviously, depending on what the message the person is trying to convey, maybe it's more appropriate not to do any correction. And finally, the communicative activity. So if it's an interview, or like I said, if it's a conference, it's not the correct activity to start correcting. But if you're in a classroom, then it's the right time to give the person a clue that their sentence was not correct. Also, sometimes you might choose not to correct if it's not relevant. So for example, if, so we have an example here from one of my participants. So she asked the student, so what was the video about? And the student responded, the video is about boat with kite. Now, obviously, the sentence is not correct, but the teacher was more interested in knowing if the student had understood the video rather than forming a correct sentence. So in this case, she said, yes, that's right. The video is about a boat with a kite. Now, be careful here. That's an example, and sometimes we do that. So we focus on the message rather than the form of it. But sometimes we can give what is called false reinforcement. So in this context, the teacher said, yes, that's right. So maybe subconsciously the student will register, oh, my sentence was correct. And they will not notice that the teacher actually changed the sentence in the second part. So sometimes you have to be careful with not correcting. If you say, yes, correct, excellent, then the student might take it as my language skills are excellent rather than my answer is correct. Okay, so that's an example for no correction. Okay, so now let's get back to our second possible answer, which was, yesterday you ate an apple. Or, I believe you mean ate, since yesterday is in the past. So these two strategies are called recasts. Recast means that you actually give the correct form to the other person. So you can do that simply by recasting, so you just repeat the correct form, or you could do an actual explicit correction. So like, oh, you mean ate because ate is yesterday is in the past, so you give the explanation for your correction. So those are both modeling type of strategies. That means that the other person is giving the correct form, is modeling for the other person. So in which cases do we want to use these strategies? Well, first of all, when we're talking about lexical repair. So that means vocabulary. Obviously, if you use the wrong vocabulary, it's probably because you don't know the correct word. If you say, yesterday I drink an apple, there's no point in me saying, drink, because you probably don't know that the right word is eat. So it's easier and it's more productive to actually give, oh, you mean eat. Eat when it's solid and drink when it's liquid. You can give the explicit correction. It's also very useful for phonological repair. That means pronunciation. So once again, usually when you mispronounce a word, it's because you don't know the correct pronunciation. So in this case, it's easier if the other person models the correct pronunciation, and that way you can repeat it and actually repair your pronunciation. It's also useful for unknown structures. So if a student is saying a very complicated sentence that they've probably never studied or never heard before, there's no point in me pushing them to make their sentence by themselves. It's much easier if I say it the correct way. So sometimes if it's either unknown or complex structures, if the sentence is very long and there's like 10 different mistakes in the same sentence, I'm not gonna fixate on every single one. I'd rather just give the whole sentence correctly and the student can try to understand why. So yes. Also, recast is usually favored by teachers because it's quicker. It's much quicker to just give the student the answer correctly rather than wait for them to find what was their mistake and how to correct it. So most often than not, teachers will use recast in their classes, and it also gives less emphasis on the mistake. So the student doesn't feel like, oh my God, everyone's looking at me and hoping for me to get it right. It's just, it passes by and it's quicker for the class and it's easier. However, that means that it's harder to notice. So sometimes someone will correct you and you don't even notice it. So yeah, it can happen sometimes that, especially with pronunciation. For example, when I first started speaking Spanish, I would always say policia. Oh yes, the policia, la policia vino. And then people would correct me, policia. And I would just be like, yeah, policia, policia, policia. And I didn't notice that they were actually correcting me. So that can be a little bit problematic sometimes. So it's harder to notice that you're giving a correction. Therefore, there's less uptake. Uptake means basically learning. So sometimes you can correct the student and they're like, yes, sure. And then 5 seconds later, they forgot that this correction happened. So it's a little bit less effective. So even though it's the strategy that teachers use the most, maybe it's not the most appropriate one to use. So it's not as effective, and also it's definitely not as effective if it's not repeated. So if the learner doesn't repeat the correct form and just goes like, yes, got it. Well, obviously they didn't get it. It just went through one ear, out the other. So you have to make sure that the learner actually, if you say policia and the other person says no, policia, you have to make sure that the student repeats it. Oh, policia, and then it might be a little bit more of an uptake. Otherwise, it's most likely that it's just gonna go right above their head. So here we have some examples from my participants for my study. So the first one here is an example of an explicit correction from teacher D. So the student said, the government says we win a lot of money. Now the teacher responded, oh, you said you win a lot of money, but you win the lottery. when you work, what is the word? Do you know? And the student said, I don't know. So as I said, when it's vocabulary, if you don't know, you don't know. You can't just concentrate harder and find it. So in this case, the teacher said, you earn money. When you work, you earn it. You don't win. And the student just went, oh, okay. Now, do you think that the student will remember this word for the next lesson? Well, we don't know. It depends on each person. But to be more effective, ideally, the teacher should have asked the student to say the sentence again, to say, oh, the government says we earn a lot of money. All right. So that's an example of an explicit correction because the teacher gave the explanation behind it. So you win the lottery, but when you work, you earn money. Now here we have another example from, again, Teacher D's class. He likes to use a lot of recasts in his lessons. So this is a recast example. So the student said, I just know some people who was born there. And then the teacher said, were born, by accentuating. And then the student just kept going and said, yes, in Canada. So maybe in this case, the student didn't even notice that the teacher was making a correction. Maybe the student thought that the teacher was asking a question or didn't hear correctly. So yeah, it can be a little tricky. So we try to stay off recast when it's not necessary. All right, now, now let's get back to our last example. So once again, with yesterday I eat an apple. So we had 4 strategies here, which were yesterday you, and I'm sorry, could you say that again? Or you eat an apple, or don't forget to use the past tense of the verb. Now, these are all strategies which are part of the category which we call prompts. Prompts basically means that instead of giving the learner the answer, you let them figure it out. So you give them a clue that something is wrong, and then you let them try to fix their mistake by themselves. So you solicit self-repair instead. Now there are different kinds of prompts. So we have here the first example, which is elicitation. Elicitation is when you let the student finish the sentence. You go, and you let them finish. So here we have an example from teacher E. She's a French teacher, so you might practice your French a little bit here. So the student said, je allais au cinéma pour regarder un film. And then the teacher said, je, and the student, oh, je suis allé, pardon. So here, instead of telling her what the exact mistake was, the teacher just like started it, and the student was like, oh yes, I know this, sorry. And they said the correct form of the verb. Okay, so this is called elicitation, when you do that, are you sure? Okay, then we have clarification request. So here we have an example from teacher D's class. So here you'll practice a little bit of Spanish. So the student got really excited and started talking in Spanish, even though this was an English class. So she went, oh, Lisandro, que es actor, claro que lo conozco, ¿cómo no? And then the teacher asked her, sorry, I didn't understand that. What did you say? You said he's an actor? So instead of telling her what the sentence was, he just said like, oh, I didn't understand. Can you say it in English? Even though the teacher speaks very well Spanish, but he wanted the student to say it again correctly in the right language in this case. So then the student corrected, yes, sorry, Lisandro is the name of an actor from our generation. So yes, but in this case, it worked very well. Now, so this is for the clarification request when you put a question mark at the end. What did you say? Are you sure? Okay. Then we have another type, which is the meta-linguistic feedback. So that is when you give the grammar reason behind the mistake, and you hope that the student will get it and will go back in their head to their grammar class and go like, oh yes, future tense is like this, and then they correct it. So here we have another example from teacher E. The student said, si je gagnerais au loto, j'achèterais. So in this case, they use the conditional. And the teacher said, attention, ici, tu dois utiliser l'imparfait avec si. Comme en anglais. If I won, I would, blah, 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 blah. So here, she even gave the example in English. So when the two languages are not so distant, you can even give the feedback in the other language, right? But yeah, in this case, it wasn't necessary. Had she said only l'imparfait, I'm pretty sure the student would have been like, oh, imparfait, that's how you conjugate it. Oh, okay, je comprends, si je gagnais. And there we go. The student fixed their mistake by themselves using the grammar explanation from the teacher. And finally, we have an example of teacher D, who used repetition. So repetition is basically just repeating exactly what the student said, repeating the mistake, and hoping that when they hear it, they'll be like, something sounds wrong in this sentence, and they'll fix it. So here, the student said, I love Canada. Canada is a beautiful city. And the teacher said, a beautiful city? And the student said, oh, a beautiful country, and started laughing. So obviously the student in this case knew the word country. They just made a mistake because they were talking in the moment. You know how it happens. So yes, so the teacher just said it again, and that was enough for the student to say, whoa, whoa, Canada is not a city. All right. So basically, in this case, the teacher needs to help the student notice. And the prompts are very good for that because, like I said, recast, sometimes you don't notice you're being corrected. But in this case, the teacher is not letting the student a chance to keep going. They just tell you, oh, say that again, but correctly, please. And therefore, it's considered more effective. So there has been many tests and studies, and in like 90-something%, the vast majority prompts are considered more effective to retrieve knowledge. So students will learn more if they have to go back in their head, go back in their notebooks and find the right answer than if the teacher just gives it to them. However, this is effective to retrieve knowledge. So that means it only works if you know the right answer. Like I said, if it's a new word you've never heard before, or if it's a structure you've never studied, there's no point in using the prompts. That's just going to make you like, whoa, I don't know, and very uncomfortable. And yeah, so of course, it's more effective in certain situations. And also, it's better combined with form-focused instruction. So it always works better if you've actually studied the topic. So if you were just practicing conversation all the time, then me saying, oh, you need to use the past tense here, I'm just going to be like, what is the past tense? So if you haven't had an actual form-focused class where the teacher tells you, here is the past tense, eat, ate, sing, sang, blah, 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 then there's no use. So that doesn't mean that I'm saying that form-focused instruction is better. I'm saying that with prompts, form-focused instruction is better. So if you prefer to have not form-focused classes, you prefer to have just conversation and input, then Recast will be more effective for you. But you might need to repeat 10, 15 times instead of just once, the same mistake. So yes, that's all about prompts. Now you're going to say, okay, that's all great, but which is best? Which one should I actually use? Well, according to research, basically there is no right answer. So here we have a little quote from Roy Lister, who is kind of like the guru of corrective feedback. There are many, many important researchers on the topic, but he's very, very important. And he says, Lister and colleagues, in their many different studies, have followed suit throughout the years and have encouraged teachers to use a variety of corrective feedback types. So basically they've said there's not one right answer, and actually it's better to use all of them together, not focus on one, because just like anything, it might work with some people, it might not work with other people. So it's better to vary what you're doing instead of just doing always the same thing. So this recommendation is based on the premise that recasting what students already know is unlikely to be the most effective strategy to ensure continued L2 development. Like I said, if you're using recast with something that students already know, it's not as effective. Sometimes they don't notice, and sometimes it just goes in one ear and out the other. And that prompting learners to draw on what they have not yet acquired is equally ineffective. Once again, like I said, letting the student correct something that they don't know how to correct, no point there. Therefore, it's better to use all of them combined. So here we have an example from teacher E, once again. And here, the student said, Elle allait avec moi la semaine prochaine. The teacher said, attention, comment tu dis aller? So first, they tried to use the meta-linguistic feedback. And the student said, oh, elle va. So they corrected it, but it's still not in the future tense. It's in the present. So the teacher once again used the meta-linguistic feedback. Oui, mais là tu parles au futur. So then the student said, elle allerait. So by seeing this, the teacher figured out, oh, maybe she doesn't know this verb in the future because it's an irregular verb. So she gives them an explicit correction here. Elle ira, c'est irrégulier. So she gives them the answer in this case because the student didn't know. And then the student says, elle irait. So the teacher, still not getting desperate, having a lot of patience with the student, says, wait, she might not know this irregular verb, but she does know the future tense endings. So she goes, elle, prompting her to say, elle ira avec moi la semaine prochaine. And then the teacher says, voilà, on y est arrivé. She was very relieved after these 4 different strategies. The student finally got the right answer. So we can see here that combining the strategies can be very effective. And it's also easier to remember because you're negotiating with the student. Okay, all right. Now, I know that not all of you are teachers, so some of you might say, okay, but what's the point for me if I'm not a language teacher? Well, you can use this knowledge also as a language learner. So as a learner, so first of all, being aware that these strategies exist will help you notice them, obviously. And here are some steps that I found were helping me when I was in my language classes to learn better. So while receiving one feedback may not be enough to correct the error forever. Now, don't think that because you get corrected once, you'll remember it. It's not like that. You have to practice many, many, many times. You're probably aware of that. But there are certain steps that you can follow to improve uptake of oral feedback. So of course, it's different than written feedback, because written feedback, you can always go back to your book and say, oh yes, when I wrote that sentence, the teacher corrected it this way. But when it's oral, you can't just go back in the video of your memory to remember. So here are some steps that you can use for you to remember better. First of all, accept that corrective feedback is a tool to improve. So like I said in the beginning, we said that I asked you if you like being corrected. Now that depends, but the first step for correction to actually take in is to accept it. So don't go like making up excuses every time you make a mistake. Just say, thank you for your correction. I can improve with that. Yay. All right, the second step is to ask for immediate feedback when practicing speaking. So some people don't like to correct other people, but if you're practicing with your language partner, you have to tell them, you have to say, please correct me as much as possible. I love being corrected. I love improving. Or, well, usually teachers will correct you either way, but you can still mention it to your teacher. Please tell me when I'm wrong, so that they know and they try to do it a little more, because sometimes you practice with your language partner and the whole conversation goes by with 10,000 mistakes and they don't say a word because they understood the basics and they're like, oh, that's fine. So tell them that you want to be corrected. And then try to self-repair before asking for the correct way. So when you get corrected, always try by yourself to find the right answer before they tell you. So just go like, wait. I know this word. I studied it before, the future tense. It goes like this. And then try to self-repair. Because as we said, prompts are usually more effective. So if you try to do it by yourself, there's more chance of you learning it. And then finally, no matter which strategy you are using, always restate your full idea when with the feedback received. Okay, so before you just go like, oh, okay, got it, just restate your whole sentence and say it again so that it sticks inside your head. Even if you're self-prepared, don't just go like, oh, the future tense is ira, and then keep going. No, just say ira. So, elle ira avec moi la semaine prochaine. Just say the full idea once again, so that you can actually integrate the correction, not just in your head, but in your ideas and in the way you express yourself. So those are my tips for you. Hopefully, they can be helpful when you're learning a language, and hopefully you start correcting people more when they make mistakes, but always in a helpful and, how do we say, constructive way. So don't start saying, haha, you suck, you can't say, I ate an apple. No, the goal of corrective feedback is always to be constructive and to improve, and we all want to improve together. All right, so like I said, this is just a sneak peek of a much bigger project, and I hope that I can share this bigger project later on with you. So my whole master's thesis, which I'm working on right now, is the use of oral corrective feedback in online EFL lessons. So I'm an online teacher, and I was really interested in figuring out what happens when people learn online through video Skype? Do you give more feedback, less feedback? So I was interested in that. So my research questions are, to what extent do teachers provide corrective feedback in online lessons, and what strategies do they use? So I'm going to look at the strategies that I presented to you today and see which strategies were more often used in online lessons. And I'm looking at one-on-one lessons. So I want to see if maybe it's different in one-on-one lessons, because in the classroom, you want to go fast and you have a curriculum, whereas in online lessons, usually the student is there just for fun, so maybe it's a little different. I'm looking into it at the moment, and it's very interesting. And then my second question is, what are the reasons that motivate these teachers to provide corrective feedback? So I want to look at the feedback provided by the teachers, and I want them to explain why did they use this strategy, why did they use Recast in this case, and why did they prompt the student in that case. I want to know how they figure it out, if they do. Maybe they just don't know what they're doing, but I want them to look back and see what is happening. So yes, so I put to be followed, because hopefully once I get all my results, I can present to you more about online teaching in another presentation, maybe next year. We'll see. All right, so that is all. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope that you learned something, and I hope that it was good. I don't know if there's going to be a question period, but if there is, I will be available and answering all your questions, obviously. So here, if you want to contact me outside of this, you can use my Facebook. I will probably be able to share this presentation with you. So you have a link here to my Facebook or my email address. So yes, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conferences. I hope that you like it and you get to share with many other people, and that you find new language partners to practice and correct. Thank you. Goodbye.